Success at work means absolutely nothing if you're failing at home. I remember sitting down with Sarah, a client of mine in downtown Toronto on Bay Street, about 42 floors up. And just behind her, I could see all these awards that she had in her office: top 40 under 40, Deloitte's fastest growing company, 3 or 4 years in a row, CEO of the year. And at the very same time, right in front of all these awards, she was sitting there with tears welling up in her eyes, confiding in me about a recent experience that she had with her son. He graduated a couple weeks before, and as he was walking across the stage, it dawned on her that she had no idea who her son was anymore. And as we continued to connect, she was just sharing with me her confusion and how she's just been trying to understand how can she grow companies, buy and merge companies, transform company cultures, yet struggle to go through a holiday with her family without any tension. How did she get there? And Sarah's story is a pretty common one that I've heard in different variations and shapes and forms over the last 10 years as I've worked with hundreds of executives, is that the very skills that have helped them be really effective leaders in business don't translate to home. And a lot of the stress and tension that they have at home with their families becomes a barrier to their leadership effectiveness at work. Through my experience, I've come to see a pretty consistent observation from this work, is that just like companies who move through predictable stages as they continue to grow and scale, families also move through very predictable stages in their own evolution and their development. But there's a bit of an executive paradox here, because as good as executives might be at leading their businesses, a lot of times the skills that have enabled them to do that create unintentional harm at home. I mean, just take a few minutes to think about what an executive role looks like and what they're being asked to do day to day. They're being asked to identify problems and implement solutions really quickly, drive outcomes through clear metrics and accountability, optimize for efficiency and productivity, manage through structure and systems, and lead with strategic vision and decisive action. These approaches work brilliantly when it comes to running corporations. But families are not companies. They are very complex, adaptive systems that require very different approaches and qualities to be able to steward their ongoing evolution and development. Today, I'd love to introduce to you the Regenerative Family Framework, a framework that I've built through all of my experience working with families that clearly illustrates 4 different stages that families go through. And this is really important for you to learn and understand. So today, as I go through this, I want you to listen with a really keen ear to the qualities and the characteristics of each of these various stages. I really hope this is going to help you get really clear on exactly where your family is at today. And not with the intention of being judgmental of where you are, but by getting really clear on the stage that you're in right now, it's going to help you understand what you can focus on next to continue guiding your family forward. The first stage of this framework is called the fractured foundation. The best way that I could explain this stage to you is by telling you a story about my client, Michael. As Michael and I were sitting down, he was just celebrating the largest acquisition that his insurance brokerage had in their whole history. But it was really difficult for him to actually celebrate this milestone because while that was something going really well in his life, his daughter had made a choice a few years ago to stop talking to him entirely, and there was a huge wedge between them. He was sharing with me that he'd done everything from offering to buy her a car, send her to her favorite school, trying to get the best therapist in town to go and work with her, but every single thing that he was trying to do continued to actually make the situation worse than it seemed. So in that fractured foundation phase of a family's development, there are a couple really clear patterns and qualities that you can find in this stage. Families that are in a fractured foundation stage often experience deep disconnection where family members operate in what neuroscientist Dr. Stephen Porges calls defensive autonomic states, existing in perpetual fight, flight, or freeze. You'll also notice the presence of what Dr. John Gottman's 4 horsemen on relationships break down: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And executives often stay stuck in what Dr. Brené Brown calls presentation mode. The same strategic self that they use for board meetings and investor presentations comes forward at home and creates a barrier to intimacy and vulnerability. What makes this stage particularly difficult for a lot of executives is that it starts to expose the limitations of their professional competencies. You can't solve emotional disconnection with logistical solutions. The second stage in the regenerative family framework is what I call masked connection. A great example I can share with you around this is my client Elena. She tells this story super well. A few years ago, if you were to look at the stage of her family outside in, on Instagram, holiday cards, everything looked great. Family vacations, everybody going to her son's soccer tournaments, celebrating their first granddaughter, Thanksgiving gatherings, all of these moments coming together that outside in, everything looked great. They had gotten really good at making everything look well, but underneath of that in the process, they had actually forgot how to actually connect. So a way I like to describe families in that stage of masked connection is that they are performing family. Underneath of all of that harmony is a much deeper layer of disconnection. Here are a couple really simple ways that you can start to identify a family that might be in this stage of masked connection. One of the first telltale signs of a family that is in masked connection is their ability to proactively identify, anticipate, and avoid potential conflicts. Instead of actually leaning into the conflict, they've become masterful at applying their strategic thinking and their emotional sensitivity to make sure conflicts never happen. Another great example of a family who's in mass connection is what Murray Brown called emotional cutoff, where they can maintain physical proximity, but at a much deeper level, they're doing this while creating emotional distance, or what organizational psychologist Adam Grant has called false harmony, where peace is maintained through avoidance rather than authentic resolution. What makes this particular stage really difficult for a lot of executives is the danger of excellence. A lot of the skills that allow them to thrive at work enable them to create a really good family system where everything runs pretty smoothly, but it lacks heart. Relationships with emotional needs that go unsatiated lead to their spouse and to their kids starting to seek that out elsewhere. Now, the third stage I want to share with you is called respectful resonance. A client of mine, David, who is a global operations executive, I think illustrates this really good. We were connecting over Zoom a few weeks ago, and he was just sharing with me how he was noticing a real palpable shift in his experience with his kids at home. He was saying to me, Dave, I just think I'm finally starting to get it. Instead of controlling and managing everything at home, I'm actually just creating space to listen to my kids. We're having longer dinners. They're sharing with me what they're actually going through. And the real hallmark is not necessarily just trust, but it is a pivotal shift from really trying to maintain harmony in the home to building moments where there can really be authentic connection with your kids and with your partner. So for families that are starting to enter or are in this stage of respectful resonance, there are a couple key qualities that will help you understand whether or not you're here. The first is that families who are in this stage of respectful resonance have the ability to repair after conflict and disconnection. Dr. John Gottman's research confirms that relationship success isn't determined by the absence of conflict, but by the ability to repair it. Another telltale sign of a family that is in this stage is that they have created family rituals, islands of consistency in a sea of change, as Dr. Doherty puts it, where there are reliable touch points that maintain the sense of connection proactively within the family. The third thing that you'll notice for families that are in this particular stage or have evolved their way here is that there are new neural pathways for connection that are being developed throughout the family. Families who are in that respectful resonance will often notice behavioral changes within their family members. Dr. Siegel's research shows how focused presence actually changes the brain structure. And a lot of families that find their way to this particular stage will notice that their family members are behaving differently when they're together. What makes this particular stage so amazing is how it gives us an opportunity to reappropriate our leadership skills in different ways. Strategic thinking starts to be applied in a way where we're creating more conditions for connection instead of control. Now, the fourth and final stage, as you might have imagined, is called the regenerative family. I like to think about this particular stage just like a company when it is in its optimal performance. There are going to be quarters where you hit your targets and where you miss them. But really high-performing companies over time, regardless of the results, They don't change the essence of who they are and the character of the type of company that they're building. They're able to separate character from behavior, and they remain focused on the culture and who they're becoming as an organization. And the same goes for a family. The regenerative family is going to have its ups and its downs, but a regenerative family continues to be focused on the character and the essence of who they are becoming. Ultimately, families that are in this stage are in a family flow state where everything continues to be smooth regardless of the ups and downs. People are able to actually use those challenges as ways for being able to deepen their connection to who they are and who the family is together. So there are a couple key qualities that will help you understand whether or not your family is in the regenerative family stage at this particular point in time. The first is that each family member feels safe to explore, take risks, and return for support. Dr. Mary Ainsworth's attachment research shows that these families operate as a secure base for each family member. Second one is that a lot of these families who are in this stage maintain core values while adapting to change. Just like anti-fragile organizations who benefit from change and uncertainty, families that are in this particular stage demonstrate what organizational psychologist Carl Wick calls dynamic stability. And lastly, families that are truly regenerative families have family members with strong individual identities while remaining deeply connected to the system. Murray Brown's concept of differentiation really comes alive in families like these. So where do you start? Well, just remember, you can't do everything at once. It's important as a chief family officer just to get really clear around what the right next thing is. If you continue to do the right next thing, after the right next thing, after the right next thing, I promise you, you're going to build momentum and mature your family through the regenerative family framework. But right after this, I would encourage you to maybe consider taking 2 or 3 clear steps here. First, take a few moments to actually reflect on these 4 different stages and identify where do you think you're at right now. Again, it's not about judgment. It's about, can you have the humility to accurately identify where you're at right now? The next thing I would encourage you to think about is, just based on where you're at in this particular journey, is what is one particular pain point or problem or pattern that you want to focus on solving, something that you believe is going to make a big impact in helping your family ascend to the next stage. And then lastly, I think enrolling your partner is so important. I would encourage you, instead of talking about whether in sports or the usual things at your next dinner with your spouse, bring up the conversation from today. Share where you think your family is at and have a conversation together as a team to identify where you think you really are at as a family and what your right next thing is to do. Remember, it's not whether or not your family is going to evolve. It's whether or not you're going to help lead that evolution intentionally. As a leader, you have all the skills you need to be able to lead your family through the evolution of this journey. It's just a matter of learning how to start to apply these in a bit of a different way at home. And just like a dear mentor of mine often reminds me, every single CEO can be replaced, every VP, every director, we can find somebody to go and do those jobs. But as a father, as a spouse, as a brother, as a sister, all those roles, we can't be replaced. So make sure you're leading where it matters most.